In the scorching summer of 1867, broke rancher Jacob Whitmore made a desperate choice at a Wyoming Territory slave auction that would change two lives forever. He bought 20-year-old Amelia and married her before sundown, turning a transaction into a partnership neither expected. But when angry neighbors arrive with torches and threats, demanding he send his new wife away, will their hastily formed bond prove strong enough to weather the storm ahead? The sound of dying cattle filled the morning air like a funeral song. Jacob Whitmore kicked at the dry dirt beneath his boots, watching dust clouds dance where green grass should have grown. His last bull lay on its side, breathing hard and slow. The summer heat of 1867 had turned his Wyoming Territory ranch into a place where dreams came to die. "Come on, old girl," Jacob whispered to his favorite cow. She looked at him with sad brown eyes, too weak to stand. He'd sold everything else, his father's pocket watch, his mother's china, even the good saddle. Now he had $3 in his pocket and 30 days to pay the bank. The ranch house behind him groaned in the wind. Paint peeled off the walls like old skin. His father had built this place with his bare hands 20 years ago, believing that hard work could beat anything the frontier threw at them. Jacob wasn't so sure anymore. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Jacob squinted against the bright sun. The man wore a brown hat and rode a black horse that kicked up clouds of dust. As he got closer, Jacob could see sweat stains on his shirt. "You Jacob Whitmore?" the rider called out. "Depends who's asking." The man pulled up his horse. "Name's Pete Collins. Got news from town that might interest you." He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "The Pemberton Ranch is having an auction today. Everything must go." Jacob's heart jumped. Old man Pemberton had owned the biggest spread in 3 counties before he died last month. What kind of everything? Cattle, horses, equipment. Pete paused and looked uncomfortable. Other things too. Jacob knew what other things meant. His stomach felt sick, but desperation made a man consider things he never thought he would. "When's the auction?" "Starts at noon in Laramie. Better hurry if you want to get there in time." After Pete rode away, Jacob stood alone in his dying ranch. He thought about his father's voice. "A man does what he has to do to survive, son. But never forget who you are while you're doing it." Jacob walked to the barn and saddled his horse. He didn't have much choice left. The ride to Laramie took 2 hours through the worst heat of the day. Jacob's shirt stuck to his back with sweat. The town came into view like a shimmer in the desert. Wooden buildings, dusty streets, and people moving around like ants. The auction was set up in the main square. A wooden platform stood in the center, surrounded by men in hats and women with parasols. Jacob tied his horse to a post and pushed through the crowd. The smell of unwashed bodies and nervous sweat filled the air. On one side of the square, cattle stood in wooden pens. On the other side, people sat in chains. Jacob's hands started shaking. He'd never owned another person, never even thought about it seriously. His parents had been against slavery, had taught him that all people deserve to be free. But now, looking at his empty pockets and thinking about his dying ranch, he wondered if good intentions could keep a man from starving. The auctioneer climbed onto the platform. He was a big man with a loud voice that carried across the square. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Pemberton Estate sale. We'll start with livestock, then move to equipment, and finish with other assets." Jacob watched as cattle sold for prices he couldn't afford. Good horses went for more money than he'd seen in 6 months. His hope sank lower with each passing minute. Then they brought out the people. The first was an old man who walked slowly and coughed a lot. He sold for $20. Next came a woman with 3 small children. A plantation owner from Texas bought them all for $60. Then she walked onto the platform. She was young, maybe 20 years old, with skin the color of coffee and cream. But it wasn't her appearance that made Jacob stare. It was the way she held herself. Straight back, head high, eyes that looked out over the crowd like she was judging them instead of the other way around. "This here's Amelia," the auctioneer called out. "Strong as an ox, smart as a whip, and can work from dawn to dusk without complaint." "What am I bid?" $30, someone shouted. "40, called another man. Jacob found himself stepping forward. Something about the girl reminded him of his mother, that same quiet strength that no hardship could break. His mother had died when he was 15, but he still remembered her voice. Judge people by their character, Jacob, not by anything else. $50. The voice came from Jacob's throat before he realized he was speaking. The crowd turned to look at him. A fat man in a fancy suit raised his hand. 60. Jacob's heart pounded. $60 was almost all the money he had left. But looking at the girl on the platform, seeing the way she refused to look scared even though she had to be terrified, he made a decision that would change everything. $75, he shouted. The fat man in the fancy suit glared at Jacob like he'd been insulted. His face turned red under his expensive hat. $80, he called out, his voice angry now. Jacob's mouth went dry. $80 would leave him with almost nothing. But something in the girl's eyes made him think of his mother's last words. Take care of people who can't take care of themselves, son. That's what makes us human. $100. Jacob's voice cracked as he said it. The crowd went quiet. $100 was more money than most people in Laramie saw in a year. The fat man looked shocked, then angry, then disgusted. He waved his hand and walked away, muttering under his breath. Sold to the gentleman in the brown shirt, the auctioneer called out. Come collect your property, sir. Jacob's legs felt weak as he walked toward the platform. Property. The word made him sick. He'd just bought a human being like she was a cow or a horse. What would his parents think? What did he think of himself? The girl, Amelia, watched him approach. Her eyes were dark brown and seemed to see right through him. She didn't look grateful or scared or angry. She just looked curious. That's quite a lot of money you just spent, she said quietly as the auctioneer removed her chains. Jacob was surprised she spoke so clearly. Many enslaved people he'd met spoke differently, but Amelia sounded like she'd had some education. I suppose it is, he replied, not sure what else to say. What's your name? She asked. Jacob Whitmore. I own a ranch about 2 hours from here. He paused. What's yours? Amelia. She rubbed her wrists where the chains had been. Though I suppose you can call me whatever you want now. The words hit Jacob like a punch to the stomach. She was right. Legally, he could name her anything, make her do anything, treat her however he wanted. The thought made him feel sick. I'd like to call you Amelia, if that's all right with you, he said. She looked surprised. It was the first time her expression had changed since she'd stepped onto the platform. That would be all right. Jacob helped her down from the platform. People stared as they walked through the crowd. Some looked curious, others disapproving. A few women whispered behind their hands. Where are we going? Amelia asked as they reached his horse. Jacob realized he hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd acted on impulse, spending money he couldn't afford on a person he didn't know, and now he had to figure out what came next. Home, I suppose, he said. To the ranch. And then what? It was a good question. Jacob had never owned enslaved people before. He didn't know the rules or the expectations. All he knew was that his ranch was failing, he was almost out of money, and now he was responsible for another person's life. I don't rightly know, he admitted. They rode together on his horse, Amelia sitting behind him. She was quiet for most of the trip, but Jacob could feel her watching the landscape, taking note of landmarks and distances. Smart, he thought. She's figuring out where she is in case she needs to run. Why did you buy me? She asked suddenly. Jacob had been dreading that question. I need help on the ranch, he said. The drought's been hard, and I can't manage everything alone. There were others at the auction. Stronger men. Why me? Jacob didn't answer right away. How could he explain that something about her reminded him of his mother? That her dignity in such a terrible situation had moved him to spend money he couldn't afford? You looked like you could handle yourself, he said finally. Is that all? No, Jacob admitted. But I can't explain the rest. As they got closer to the ranch, Jacob felt more and more nervous. What if she tried to run away? What if she couldn't do the work he needed? What if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life? The ranch house came into view, looking even more run down than usual. The fence needed fixing, the barn roof had holes, and weeds grew where his garden should have been. "This is it," Jacob said, trying not to sound embarrassed. Amelia didn't say anything as they dismounted. She looked around at the dying cattle, the broken fence, the peeling paint on the house. Jacob expected her to look disappointed or disgusted. Instead, she nodded like she understood. "How long has it been like this?" she asked. 2 years of drought," Jacob replied. "Lost most of my cattle, had to sell everything valuable. Banks threatening to take the land if I can't pay what I owe." "How much do you owe?" Jacob was surprised by the question. Enslaved people weren't supposed to ask about their owner's business. But then again, he'd never been an owner before, so maybe he didn't know the rules. "More than I can pay," he said honestly. Amelia walked over to look at the cattle. She moved carefully, calmly, and the animals didn't shy away from her. She examined their condition, checked their eyes and noses, ran her hands along their ribs. "These 3 might make it through winter if we can find better feed," she said. "The others?" She shook her head. "You know about cattle? I know about animals, and plants, and keeping books." She looked at him directly. "I can read and write better than most men." Jacob stared at her. Educated enslaved people were rare and dangerous in the eyes of many white people. "How did you learn?" "The master's daughter taught me in secret. Said it wasn't fair that I had a good mind but couldn't use it." Amelia's expression grew sad. "She died of fever 2 years ago. That's when everything changed." Jacob began to understand why she'd been sold. An educated enslaved woman was a threat to people who believed that enslaved people were naturally inferior. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Better than you, I'd guess." Despite everything, Jacob almost smiled. That wouldn't be hard to do. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky orange and red. Jacob realized he hadn't thought about where Amelia would sleep, or what she would eat, or any of the practical details of having another person on the ranch. "There's a small room in the back of the house," he said. "It's not much, but it's clean and private." Amelia looked surprised again. "My own room? Unless you'd prefer to sleep in the barn." "No, a room would be good." She paused. "What do you expect from me, Mr. Whitmore?" It was the same question she'd asked in town, but now it carried more weight. Jacob thought about all the things he'd heard enslaved people were forced to do, all the ways they could be mistreated and abused. "I expect hard work," he said. "Fair work for fair treatment. Nothing more, nothing less." "And if I run away?" Jacob considered the question seriously. "I'd probably be ruined financially, but I wouldn't chase you down." "Why not?" "Because I don't believe people should be owned," Jacob said quietly. I needed help, and you needed." He stopped, not sure how to finish. "I needed not to be sold to that fat man who was undressing me with his eyes," Amelia said bluntly. Jacob felt his face get hot. He'd noticed the way the other bidder had looked at Amelia, and it had made him angry without fully understanding why. "Yes," he said. "I suppose you did." They stood in the growing darkness, 2 strangers bound together by desperate circumstances, each wondering what they'd gotten themselves into. The sound of sizzling bacon woke Jacob before dawn. He sat up in bed, confused and alarmed. He hadn't cooked bacon in months because he couldn't afford it. Then he remembered Amelia. She'd been on his ranch for exactly 1 night, and already things were different. He dressed quickly and walked to the kitchen. Amelia stood at his old wood stove, cooking eggs and bacon like she'd been doing it in this kitchen for years. The smell made his stomach growl loudly. "Where did you find bacon?" he asked. "In your smokehouse," she replied without turning around. "Hidden behind some old sacks. Also found flour, sugar, and coffee beans. You've been living like a poor man when you had supplies all along." Jacob felt embarrassed. "I was saving those for winter." "Winter won't matter if you starve before it gets here." She turned to face him, holding a plate of food. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Jacob couldn't remember. He'd been living on beans and water for weeks. The eggs looked like gold on the white plate. Thank you, he said, sitting down at his small wooden table. Don't thank me yet. We need to talk about your situation. Amelia poured coffee into 2 cups. I looked at your books last night. My books? Jacob nearly choked on his eggs. They were sitting on your desk. I can read, remember? She sat across from him. You owe the bank $300. Your cattle are worth maybe $50 if you're lucky. And you just spent $100 on me. Jacob put down his fork. I know it looks bad. It doesn't look bad. It is bad. Amelia sipped her coffee. But not hopeless. What do you mean? You've got good land, a decent house, and water rights to the creek. Those are valuable things. She pulled out a piece of paper covered with numbers. I did some figuring. If we can get your cattle healthy and buy a few more, we might be able to pay the bank by spring. Jacob stared at the paper. The numbers were neat and organized, better than anything he could have written. How do you know about ranch finances? The plantation where I lived was also a business. I helped keep the books for 3 years before the master's daughter died. Amelia's voice got quiet. I learned a lot about making money and losing it. And you think we can save this place? I think we can try, but it'll take both of us working harder than we've ever worked before. She looked at him seriously. Are you willing to do that? Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Yes. Good. Because I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Before Jacob could ask what she meant, the sound of horse hooves interrupted them. 3 riders approached the house, moving fast and kicking up dust. Jacob recognized the man in front, Samuel Morrison, the richest rancher in the county. Stay inside, Jacob told Amelia, but she was already moving toward the window. Too late for that, she said quietly. Jacob walked outside to meet the men. Morrison sat tall in his saddle, looking down at Jacob like he was something dirty on his boot. The other 2 men looked mean and ready for trouble. Morning, Morrison, Jacob said, trying to keep his voice steady. Heard you bought yourself a slave girl yesterday, Morrison said without greeting. That true. I bought a person who needed help, yes. Morrison's face got red. Don't play word games with me, Whitmore. Folks in town are talking. Some are saying you're planning to marry that girl. Jacob felt his heart speed up. Marriage? He hadn't thought about marriage. I don't know what folks are saying, but my business is my own. Not when it affects the whole community. Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. We got standards here. Ways of doing things. You can't just go mixing races like it's normal. What I do on my own land is my choice. Wrong. Morrison's voice got hard. What you do affects all of us. Property values, reputation, the way outsiders see this territory. You think about that. After the men rode away, Jacob stood in his yard feeling shaken. He'd never thought about marriage to Amelia, but now that Morrison had mentioned it, the idea wouldn't leave his head. He walked back inside. Amelia was washing dishes, but her hands were shaking slightly. You heard all that? He asked. Hard not to. She didn't look at him. Are you going to send me away? No. The word came out stronger than Jacob expected. This is your home now. For how long? Jacob thought about Morrison's threat, about the bank note in his pocket, about the dying cattle outside. I don't know, but I'm not giving up without a fight. That afternoon, Amelia showed Jacob her idea. She led him to a section of his land near the creek where the grass was still green. We can't afford to buy healthy cattle, she said, but we can make our sick cattle healthy. Move them here where there's good water and grass. Build a proper shelter. Give them time to recover. That makes sense, but it won't be enough to pay the bank. No, but this will. She pointed to a flat area near the creek. We can grow vegetables. Lots of vegetables. The army fort buys fresh food, and so do the mining camps. People pay good money for fresh vegetables. Jacob looked at the land with new eyes. You think we can make enough money farming? I think we can make enough money to survive. And surviving is all we need to do right now. They spent the rest of the day moving cattle and planning their garden. Jacob found himself watching Amelia work. She was strong and smart, and she made him feel like maybe he wasn't alone anymore. As the sun set, they sat on his porch, tired but hopeful for the first time in months. "Can I ask you something?" Jacob said. "What?" "What Morrison said about marriage. Have you ever thought about it? Getting married, I mean." Amelia was quiet for a long time. Enslaved people don't usually get to choose who they marry, or if they marry at all. "But if you could choose? I'd want to marry someone who saw me as an equal. Someone who respected my mind as much as my work." She looked at him. "Why do you ask?" Jacob felt his face get hot. "No reason. Just curious." But as they sat in the growing darkness, both of them wondered if curiosity was all it really was. A week later, Jacob woke to find Amelia already gone from the house. Panic shot through him. Had she run away during the night? He pulled on his boots and ran outside, calling her name. "Over here." Her voice came from the creek. He found her kneeling by the water, washing clothes. Relief flooded through him, followed by embarrassment. Of course she hadn't run away. She'd been working. "I thought you'd left," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Where would I go?" she asked, wringing out one of his shirts. "I don't have any money, and I don't know this country. You could have taken my horse. And become a horse thief? That's a hanging offense." She looked at him strangely. "Did you really think I'd run?" Jacob sat down on a rock near the creek. "I don't know what to think. I've never been in this situation before." "What situation?" "Having someone depend on me. Being responsible for another person's life." Amelia hung the shirt on a tree branch to dry. "I'm not depending on you, Jacob. We're depending on each other. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Depending on someone means you can't survive without them. Depending on each other means you're stronger together than apart." She sat down beside him. "Which do you think we are?" Jacob thought about the past week. Amelia had organized his supplies, planned their garden, and cooked meals that actually tasted good. But he'd taught her about the land, shown her how to handle the cattle, and provided the money to buy seeds for planting. "Stronger together," he admitted. "Good. Because we're going to need each other for what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about what Morrison said. About marriage." She picked up a smooth stone and threw it into the creek. "He's not going to let this alone. Men like him don't give up when they think they're protecting their community." Jacob felt a chill despite the warm morning. "What do you think he'll do?" "I don't know. But I know we need to be ready." She turned to face him. "There's something else. Something I haven't told you." "What?" "I'm not really a slave anymore." Jacob stared at her. "What do you mean?" "The master who owned me died 6 months ago. His will said all his enslaved people should be freed. But his son ignored the will and sold us anyway." Amelia's voice got hard. "Which means that auction was illegal. Which means you don't actually own me." Jacob's mind raced. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I needed somewhere safe to go while I figured out what to do next. And because I thought you might send me away if you knew the truth. So you're free." "Legally, yes. But that doesn't mean much when people don't want to recognize your freedom." She threw another stone into the creek. "Besides, free doesn't mean safe. A black woman traveling alone in this territory wouldn't last a week." Jacob felt confused and relieved and worried all at the same time. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay here and make this ranch work. I want to prove that we can succeed together." She looked at him seriously. "But I also want to be honest about what we are to each other." "What are we to each other?" "I don't know yet. But I know we're not owner and property." They sat by the creek in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past. Jacob thought about everything that had changed in just 1 week. His failing ranch suddenly had hope. His empty house felt like a home. And the woman beside him made him feel things he'd never felt before. "Amelia," he said quietly. "Yes." Morrison was right about one thing. People are talking about us. About the possibility of marriage. "I know. What do you think about that?" She was quiet for a long time. "I think marriage should be about love and respect and partnership. Not about what other people think is right or wrong." Do you think we could have that? Love and respect and partnership. I think we already do, in a way. She smiled at him. The question is whether we want to make it official. Jacob felt his heart beating faster. And do you want to make it official? Are you asking me to marry you, Jacob Whitmore? I think I am. Then I think I'm saying yes. They looked at each other by the creek, both surprised by how natural the conversation had felt. Neither of them had planned to talk about marriage, but somehow it seemed like the right thing to do. When? Jacob asked. Soon. Before Morrison decides to make more trouble for us. How soon? Today. Jacob felt dizzy. Today. Why wait? We know we work well together. We respect each other. And we're both free to choose. She stood up and brushed off her skirt. Unless you're having second thoughts? No second thoughts. Just surprised. Good surprised or bad surprised? Jacob stood up too. Good surprised. Very good surprised. They walked back to the house together, both of them quiet and thoughtful. At the door, Amelia stopped and turned to him. Jacob. Yes. I want you to know that I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I'm choosing you too, he said softly. As they went inside to plan their wedding day, neither of them noticed the rider watching from the distant hill. Morrison's man had been spying on them all morning, and now he had news to report back to his boss. The game was about to change, and not everyone would be happy about it. The church bell rang like a warning across Laramie as Jacob and Amelia rode into town that afternoon. Every person on the street stopped to stare at them. The struggling white rancher and the black woman who rode beside him like an equal. Whispers followed them down Main Street like shadows. Are you sure about this? Jacob asked quietly as they tied their horses to the post outside the small chapel. Too late for doubts now, Amelia replied, but her hands shook as she smoothed her dress, the nicest one she owned, though it was still just plain blue cotton. Pastor Williams met them at the church door. He was a thin man with kind eyes who'd buried Jacob's parents and baptized half the children in the county. His face showed worry as he looked at the crowd gathering across the street. Jacob, son, are you certain this is what you want? The pastor asked in a low voice. There's going to be trouble. Big trouble. I'm certain, Jacob said, taking Amelia's hand. We're both certain. Then God help us all, the pastor muttered, opening the church door. Inside the chapel, sunlight streamed through colored glass windows, painting the wooden pews in blues and reds. The altar stood simple and clean at the front, decorated with wildflowers that Amelia had picked that morning. Only two witnesses sat in the pews: Ben Harper, a neighboring rancher who'd always been fair to Jacob, and his wife Mary. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, his voice shaking slightly, we are gathered here today to join Jacob Whitmore and Amelia in holy matrimony. Through the thin church walls, they could hear voices outside, angry voices that grew louder as more people arrived. Someone shouted something ugly, and Amelia's grip on Jacob's hand tightened. Do you, Jacob, take Amelia to be your wife, to love and honor her, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Jacob said clearly, his voice carrying to the back of the small church. And do you, Amelia, take Jacob to be your husband, to love and honor him, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? Amelia looked into Jacob's eyes and saw not an owner, but a partner. I do. Then by the power given to me by God and the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. The sound of breaking glass interrupted the pastor's words. A rock crashed through one of the colored windows, sending pieces of blue glass across the floor. Shouts erupted outside, and someone pounded on the church door. Open up, Williams. Morrison's voice boomed from outside. This is an abomination, and we won't stand for it. Pastor Williams looked terrified, but he stood straighter. What God has joined together, let no man tear apart, he said firmly to Jacob and Amelia. You may kiss your bride. Jacob leaned down and kissed Amelia gently. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like hope and fear mixed together. The church door burst open. Morrison stormed in with 6 men behind him, their faces red with anger. Some carried ropes, others had guns on their hips. "This ends now, Whitmore," Morrison growled. "No legal marriage between a white man and a colored woman in this territory. I don't care what that fool preacher says. The law says different." Pastor Williams spoke up, his voice braver than his shaking hands. "I've married them legally and properly." "Laws can change," Morrison said with a cold smile, "especially when the community demands it." Ben Harper stood up from his pew. "Sam Morrison, you got no right to bust into God's house like this. Stay out of this, Ben. This doesn't concern you." "Wrong." Mary Harper stood beside her husband. "This concerns all of us. What Jacob and Amelia do is their business, not yours." More people pushed through the church door, but to Jacob's surprise, not all of them looked angry. Several neighbors he recognized stood with uncertain faces, like they weren't sure which side to choose. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," said Tom Bradley, an older rancher who commanded respect in the community. "These two aren't hurting anybody. They're destroying the natural order." Morrison shot back. "Next thing, you'll have colored people thinking they can live anywhere, marry anyone, act like they're equal to white folks. Maybe they should be able to," Mary Harper said quietly, but her voice carried in the small church. The crowd fell silent. Even Morrison looked shocked that a respectable white woman had spoken such words. Amelia stepped forward, still holding Jacob's hand. "Mr. Morrison, I understand you're upset, but I'm not trying to destroy anything. I just want to build a life with my husband." "You're not his wife," Morrison spat. "You're his property, and property can't marry." "Actually," Amelia said calmly, "I'm not his property. I was never legally enslaved to begin with." The church erupted in confused voices. Morrison's face went white, then red again. "What are you talking about? The man who owned me died 6 months ago. His will freed all his enslaved people. His son sold us illegally." Amelia's voice got stronger. "Which means Jacob never owned me. Which means I married him as a free woman by choice." Jacob felt proud listening to his wife speak with such dignity and strength. Wife. The word felt strange and wonderful in his mind. Morrison looked like he'd been punched. If Amelia had been free all along, then Jacob hadn't violated any laws about enslaved people. The marriage was completely legal. "Doesn't matter," Morrison said finally. "Free or not, you're still colored. Still not good enough for a white man." "That's enough, Sam." Tom Bradley's voice cut through the tension. "You've said your piece. Now get out of this church before you say something you'll regret." Morrison looked around the room, seeing that the crowd was no longer entirely on his side. Some people looked uncomfortable with his harsh words. Others seemed more interested in the drama than the cause. "This isn't over, Whitmore," Morrison said as he pushed toward the door. "You'll regret this day." After Morrison and his men left, the church felt strangely quiet. The remaining people, maybe a dozen neighbors, looked at Jacob and Amelia with mixtures of curiosity, concern, and something that might have been respect. "Well," Pastor Williams said, trying to smile, "that was certainly an exciting wedding." Ben Harper stepped forward and shook Jacob's hand. "Congratulations, Jacob. Amelia." He nodded to both of them. "You'll always be welcome at our table." Several other neighbors offered similar congratulations, though some looked nervous about being seen supporting the marriage. As people began to leave, Jacob and Amelia found themselves alone in the church with Pastor Williams. "What happens now?" Jacob asked. "Now you go home and live your lives," the pastor replied. "But be careful." Morrison meant what he said about this not being over. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jacob helped Amelia onto his horse, and they rode out of town together as husband and wife. "Are you sorry?" Amelia asked as they headed toward their ranch. "About what?" "About the trouble this will cause. About Morrison's threats." Jacob thought about the broken church window, the angry faces, the uncertainty ahead. Then he looked at the woman riding beside him, intelligent, brave, beautiful, and now his partner in every way. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not sorry at all." The sound of hammering filled the morning air as Jacob repaired the chicken coop that had collapsed during the night. 3 weeks had passed since their wedding, and life had settled into a rhythm of hard work and quiet happiness. Amelia emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, her hair tied back with a ribbon he'd bought her in town. "The Henderson boy rode by while you were working," she said, handing him a cup. "Brought news from town." Jacob paused in his hammering. News from town was rarely good these days. "What kind of news?" "Morrison's been talking to people, trying to get them to boycott anyone who does business with us." Amelia sat on an overturned bucket beside him. "Mrs. Henderson won't buy our vegetables anymore. Neither will the baker or the hotel." Jacob felt his stomach sink. They'd planted a large garden, counting on selling vegetables to make money for the bank payment. If people refused to buy from them, their plan would fail. "How many people are refusing to buy?" he asked. "About half the town, according to young Henderson." Amelia sipped her coffee. "But the other half don't seem to care about Morrison's campaign." "Will that be enough?" "I don't know. We'll have to see." Jacob resumed hammering, but his mind wasn't on the chicken coop. Morrison was smarter than he'd thought. Instead of direct confrontation, he was using economic pressure to force them out. It might work. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, another rider approaching fast. Jacob shaded his eyes against the sun and recognized the horse. It was Tom Bradley, the older rancher who'd spoken up for them at the church. "Morning, Tom," Jacob called as the man dismounted. "What brings you out here?" Tom looked serious. "Need to talk to both of you. It's important." They sat on the porch and Tom accepted a cup of coffee from Amelia. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "Morrison came to see me yesterday," Tom began. "Made me an offer." Jacob felt his chest tighten. "What kind of offer?" "He wants to buy my ranch. For a fair price," he said. "More than fair, actually." Tom stared into his coffee. "Problem is, I know why he wants it." "Why?" Amelia asked. "My land borders yours on the north side. If Morrison owns it, he can control your water access. Block the creek that feeds your cattle." Jacob felt cold despite the warm morning. Without access to the creek, his cattle would die. His garden would fail. The ranch would become worthless. "Are you going to sell?" Jacob asked quietly. Tom was quiet for a long moment. "My wife's been sick. Real sick. We need money for doctors. Maybe to go back east where she can get better treatment." He looked at Jacob with sad eyes. "I'm sorry, son. I like you and Amelia, but I got to think of my family first." Jacob understood. He'd do the same thing if he were in Tom's position. "When?" "Papers are being drawn up today. Morrison wants to finalize everything by the end of the week." After Tom left, Jacob and Amelia sat in silence on their porch. The sound of birds singing and cattle lowing seemed to mock their situation. "We could leave," Amelia said finally. "Sell what we can and go somewhere else. California, maybe, or Oregon." "With what money?" "We spent almost everything we had on supplies for the garden." Jacob kicked at a loose board on the porch. "Besides, I'm not running away from Morrison. It's not running away if we're making a smart choice for our future. This is our home, Amelia. Our land. I won't let him drive us off." Amelia stood up and walked to the porch railing. "Then we need a different plan." "Like what?" "I've been thinking about something. Remember what I told you about the master's will? About how his son sold us illegally?" "Yes." "What if we could prove it? What if we could show that the auction was illegal and that you paid good money for stolen property?" Jacob thought about this. What good would that do us? If the auction was illegal, then you could demand your money back. $100 would be enough to buy cattle, or pay down the debt, or maybe even buy Tom's land ourselves. But how do we prove it? The will is probably filed at the courthouse in Cheyenne. If we could get a copy. Amelia turned to face him. "I know it's a long shot, but it might be our only chance." Jacob felt a spark of hope. How long would it take to get to Cheyenne? 2 days hard riding. 2 days there, Maybe a day to find the records, 2 days back. That's almost a week. What if Morrison tries something while we're gone? We'll have to risk it. Amelia's voice was firm. Unless you have a better idea. Jacob thought about their options. Stay and watch Morrison slowly strangle their ranch, or take a chance on a trip that might save them or might leave them even worse off. We'll need to leave someone to watch the place, he said finally. Ben Harper might do it. He and Mary have been good to us. And we'll need traveling money. I have some jewelry hidden away, pieces from before the auction. We could sell them. Jacob looked at his wife with admiration. Even in their darkest moment, she was thinking ahead, planning, refusing to give up. All right, he said. We'll try it. But first, we need to make sure we can trust Ben. That afternoon, they rode to the Harper ranch. Ben and Mary listened to their plan with growing concern. It's dangerous, Ben said finally. Cheyenne's a rough town, and you're asking for trouble traveling together. We'll be careful, Jacob assured him. What if Morrison finds out you're gone? What if he tries to take your cattle or damage your property? That's why we need someone we trust to keep an eye on the place, Amelia said, just to make sure nothing too obvious happens. Mary Harper spoke up. We'll do it. Ben can ride over twice a day, and I'll come by to collect eggs and milk the cow. We can't pay you, Jacob warned. Don't want payment, Ben replied. Just want to see you two get a fair chance. As they rode home that evening, Jacob felt grateful for the friends they'd found. Morrison might have turned some people against them, but others were willing to help. When do we leave? Amelia asked. Tomorrow morning. Early. Jacob. Yes. What if this doesn't work? What if we can't find the will or it doesn't say what I think it says? Jacob reached over and took her hand. Then we'll figure out something else. Together. Promise. Promise. That night, they packed their few belongings into saddlebags. Amelia wrapped her jewelry carefully in a cloth. A silver necklace, a small gold ring, and earrings that had belonged to her mother. They represented the last of her old life, but she was willing to trade them for a chance at a new one. As they prepared for bed, both of them felt the weight of what lay ahead. 5 days that could determine their entire future. 5 days that would either save their ranch or destroy their last hope. Outside their window, a coyote howled in the distance, as if warning them of the dangers that waited on the road to Cheyenne. The gunshot cracked through the morning air like thunder, sending Jacob's horse rearing in panic. He fought to control the animal while scanning the rocky hills around them for the shooter. Beside him, Amelia's mare danced sideways, her eyes wide with fear. Over there. Amelia pointed to a cluster of boulders 50 yards away, where smoke drifted from a rifle barrel. They'd been riding hard for Cheyenne for 2 days, making good time across the rough Wyoming Territory. Now, just 20 miles from their destination, someone was shooting at them. Get down! Jacob shouted, pulling Amelia from her horse as another shot rang out. They dove behind a fallen log, their hearts pounding. Who is it? Amelia whispered. Jacob peered carefully over the log. 3 men on horseback emerged from behind the rocks, riding toward them at a steady pace. Even at a distance, he recognized the leader's expensive hat and fine clothes. Morrison, Jacob said grimly. He followed us. How did he know where we were going? Must have had someone watching us. Jacob checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. He probably figured out what we're trying to do. Morrison and his men stopped about 30 yards away, well within rifle range but far enough to have cover if shooting started. Morrison sat calmly in his saddle, looking like a man who held all the winning cards. Morning, Whitmore, Morrison called out. Beautiful day for a ride, don't you think? What do you want, Morrison? Just wanted to have a friendly conversation about your little trip to Cheyenne. Jacob felt his stomach drop. Morrison definitely knew why they were traveling to the territorial capital. Don't know what you're talking about, Jacob replied. Morrison laughed. Come now, Whitmore. You think I'm stupid? Your wife there has been asking questions about legal documents, about wills and inheritance laws. Doesn't take a genius to figure out what you're planning. Amelia spoke up from behind the log. We're not doing anything illegal, Mr. Morrison. Maybe not illegal, but certainly foolish. Morrison's voice got harder. You see, I've already been to Cheyenne. Already talked to the clerk at the courthouse. Seems like the document you're looking for had a little accident. Jacob's blood turned cold. What kind of accident? Fire damage. Terrible thing. Whole section of records from that time period got burned up last month. Nothing left but ashes. You're lying, Amelia said, but her voice shook. Am I? Why don't you ride to Cheyenne and see for yourself? Course, you might find the trip was a waste of time and money you can't afford to lose. Jacob felt rage building in his chest. Morrison had destroyed their evidence, eliminated their chance to prove the auction was illegal. All their hope, gone up in smoke. You had no right, Jacob said through gritted teeth. I had every right to protect this community from troublemakers. Morrison shifted in his saddle. But I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm prepared to make you an offer. What kind of offer? I'll buy your ranch. Fair price. Enough to pay your debts and give you money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere more suitable for a mixed couple. Jacob looked at Amelia. Her face showed the same mixture of anger and despair he felt. Their last hope had just died, and Morrison was offering them a way out. What if we refuse? Amelia asked. Then you'll lose everything anyway. Bank will take your land in 2 weeks when you can't make your payment. At least this way you get something for your trouble. And if we accept? You sign the papers today. I'll give you cash money, and you ride out of the territory by Sunday. Clean and simple. Jacob's mind raced. The offer was probably fair, maybe even generous. They could take the money and go to California or Oregon, start fresh where nobody knew their story. It was the practical choice, the safe choice. But it was also giving up. Letting Morrison win. Admitting that love and partnership couldn't overcome prejudice and power. We need time to think about it, Jacob said finally. Time's something you don't have much of, Morrison replied. But I'll give you until sunset. Meet me at the old Miller place, you know where that is. Bring your decision. Morrison and his men rode away, leaving Jacob and Amelia alone with their shattered hopes. What do we do now? Amelia asked quietly. Jacob stared at the distant mountains, thinking about his parents' dreams, about the land they'd worked so hard to claim, about the home he and Amelia had started to build together. I don't know, he admitted. I honestly don't know. They made camp that afternoon beside a small stream, both lost in their own thoughts. Jacob caught fish for dinner while Amelia gathered firewood. Neither spoke much, but both felt the weight of the decision ahead of them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Amelia finally broke the silence. There's something I need to tell you, she said, stirring the fire with a stick. What? About the will. About the evidence we were looking for. Jacob looked up from cleaning his fish. What about it? I lied. Not about the will existing, that part's true, but about where it is. I don't understand. Amelia pulled a folded paper from inside her dress. It's not in Cheyenne. It's right here. Jacob stared at the document in her hands. How did you get that? The master's daughter gave it to me before she died. Made me promise to keep it safe, use it if I ever needed to prove my freedom. Amelia unfolded the paper carefully. I've been carrying it for 2 years. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see what kind of man you really were. If you'd fight for us even when things looked hopeless. If you'd choose me over the easy way out. Jacob felt a mixture of relief, anger, and admiration. And what did you decide? That you're the kind of man worth fighting for. She handed him the will. The question is, what do we do now? Jacob read the document by firelight. It was exactly what Amelia had claimed. A legal will that freed all enslaved people on the plantation, including her. Dated and witnessed properly, it would hold up in any court. This changes everything, he said. Does it? Morrison still has power. He still owns half the town. One piece of paper might not be enough to stop him. Maybe not, but it's a start. Jacob folded the will carefully and handed it back to her. We have a choice to make. What choice? We can take Morrison's money and run away. Live safely somewhere else. Build a quiet life where nobody bothers us. Or we can fight. Use this will to demand justice. Make Morrison pay for what he's done. Show everyone that we won't be driven away. Amelia stared into the fire, watching sparks dance up toward the stars. Fighting means more danger, more enemies. No guarantee we'll win. That's right. Running away means giving up everything we've worked for. Letting Morrison think he can destroy anyone who stands up to him. That's right too. They sat in silence for a long time, each weighing the choice before them. Finally, Amelia spoke. I've been running my whole life, Jacob. Running from masters who wanted to hurt me, from laws that said I wasn't human, from people who thought I was less than nothing. She looked at him across the fire. I'm tired of running. Jacob smiled for the first time all day. So am I. Then we fight. We fight. As if summoned by their decision, the sound of horses approached their camp. Morrison and his men rode into the circle of firelight, confident smiles on their faces. Time's up, Whitmore, Morrison called out. What's your answer? Jacob stood up, Amelia beside him. Our answer is no. Morrison's smile faded. That's a mistake. Maybe, but it's our mistake to make. You'll regret this choice. We'll see about that. Morrison's face grew dark with anger. You think you're so smart, so noble, but you're just a fool who doesn't know when he's beaten. I know exactly when I'm beaten, Jacob replied. And this isn't it. The courthouse in Laramie buzzed with excitement as word spread that Jacob and Amelia Whitmore had returned to challenge Samuel Morrison in open court. Judge Henry Crawford, a stern man with steel-gray hair, had agreed to hear their case on an emergency basis after reviewing the will Amelia had carried for 2 years. This is highly irregular, Morrison's lawyer complained as he shuffled through papers at the defendant's table. My client shouldn't be subjected to this circus based on a document that could easily be forged. Judge Crawford adjusted his spectacles and examined the will again. The document appears authentic to me, Mr. Peterson. The witnesses are still alive and can be called to testify if needed. Jacob sat beside Amelia at the plaintiff's table, both of them wearing their best clothes. Amelia had sold her mother's jewelry to pay for a proper lawyer, James Mitchell, a young man from Cheyenne who specialized in property law and believed in their cause. The courtroom was packed with curious townspeople. Some supported Jacob and Amelia, others clearly sided with Morrison. The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Your Honor, Mitchell began, standing to address the court. This case is about more than money or property. It's about justice and the rule of law. My clients were the victims of an illegal transaction, and they deserve compensation for their losses. Objection, Peterson interrupted. There's no proof that Mr. Morrison knew the auction was conducted illegally. Sustained, Judge Crawford replied. Mr. Mitchell, you'll need to prove that the defendant acted with knowledge of wrongdoing. Mitchell nodded. I intend to do exactly that, Your Honor. The first witness was Pastor Williams, who testified about the marriage ceremony and Morrison's threats afterward. His nervous voice shook as he described the broken window and angry words. Mr. Morrison seemed very upset about the marriage, Williams said. He called it an abomination and said the community wouldn't stand for it. Did he threaten Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore directly? Mitchell asked. He said they would regret their decision, that it wasn't over. Peterson cross-examined aggressively. Pastor Williams, isn't it true that you were reluctant to perform this marriage yourself? I was concerned about the reaction, yes. Because you knew it would cause trouble in the community? Because I knew some people wouldn't approve. People like my client, who was simply expressing the views of respectable citizens? Judge Crawford intervened. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Morrison is not on trial for his opinions. Please stick to relevant questions. The next witness was Ben Harper, who described Morrison's attempts to organize a boycott against Jacob and Amelia's business. Sam Morrison went door to door, asking people not to buy vegetables from the Whitmores. Ben testified, said it would send the wrong message to other coloreds in the territory. Did he offer any incentives for people to join his boycott? Mitchell asked. Promised better prices at his own store for folks who cooperated. Said he'd remember who his friends were when it came time for business deals. Morrison's face grew red as Ben spoke. He whispered angrily to his lawyer, who patted his arm and shook his head. Tom Bradley took the stand next, looking uncomfortable but determined to tell the truth. Morrison offered to buy my ranch for more than it was worth, Tom said quietly. When I asked why, he said he wanted to control the water rights to the creek that runs through Whitmore's property. Did he say what he planned to do with those water rights? Mitchell pressed. Said some people needed to learn they weren't welcome in the territory. Said cutting off their water would teach them a lesson. Peterson objected repeatedly, but Judge Crawford allowed most of Tom's testimony. The picture emerging was of a man who had used his wealth and influence to systematically destroy Jacob and Amelia's livelihood. Finally, Mitchell called Amelia to the stand. She walked forward with dignity, her head held high despite the hostile stares from some spectators. Mrs. Whitmore, Mitchell began gently, please tell the court about your status at the time of the auction. Amelia's voice was clear and strong. I was legally free. My former master had died 6 months earlier, and his will freed all enslaved people on the plantation. His son ignored the will and sold us anyway. Did you know about this will at the time of the auction? Yes, I was carrying a copy of it. Why didn't you speak up during the auction? Because I was scared. A black woman claiming to be free in that crowd would have been laughed at or worse. I thought it was safer to wait and see what happened. Peterson's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Amelia's education, her motives, even her moral character. But she answered every question with calm dignity, never losing her composure. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you seduced my client's neighbor into marriage for your own financial benefit? No, sir. I married Jacob because I love him and because he treats me as an equal. Come now, a woman of your background suddenly becomes the wife of a white landowner? That's quite a stroke of luck. Mitchell objected angrily, but Amelia answered anyway. Mr. Peterson, I've spent my whole life having white men tell me what I am and what I'm worth. I won't sit here and let you do the same thing. The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs. Judge Crawford banged his gavel for order. When Morrison finally took the stand in his own defense, his arrogance was clear to everyone in the courtroom. I was protecting this community's values, he declared. That auction was conducted properly, according to territorial law. If there were irregularities, they weren't my responsibility. But you knew about Mrs. Whitmore's legal status before the auction, didn't you? Mitchell asked. I knew nothing of the sort. Really? Because 3 witnesses have testified that you mentioned specific details about the plantation's ownership that weren't public knowledge. Morrison's confidence wavered. I may have heard rumors. Rumors specific enough to make you travel to Cheyenne and destroy courthouse records? Objection, Peterson shouted. There's no proof my client was involved in any fire. Sustained, Judge Crawford said. The jury will disregard that question. But the damage was done. Morrison's nervous reaction had been seen by everyone in the courtroom. In his closing argument, Mitchell painted a picture of systematic harassment and economic warfare waged by a powerful man against a vulnerable couple. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, this case is about whether the law protects everyone equally, or only those with wealth and influence. Samuel Morrison used his power to destroy evidence, threaten witnesses, and drive my clients from their home. The question before you is simple. Will you allow such behavior to continue? Peterson's closing was predictably different. My client is a pillar of this community who was simply exercising his right to express his opinions. The plaintiffs are asking you to reward their poor judgment with money they don't deserve. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their faces were serious but determined. We find in favor of the plaintiffs, the foreman announced. We award damages in the amount of $200, plus court costs. The courtroom exploded in cheers and angry shouts. Morrison's face went white, then purple with rage. He stood up so quickly his chair fell over. "This is an outrage," he shouted. "I'll appeal this decision." "You're certainly free to try, Mr. Morrison," Judge Crawford replied calmly. "But I believe this verdict will stand." The evidence was quite clear. Outside the courthouse, Jacob and Amelia were surrounded by supporters and well-wishers. Ben and Mary Harper hugged them both, tears streaming down Mary's face. "You did it," Ben said, his voice full of pride. "You actually beat him." "We all did it," Jacob replied, looking around at the friends who had supported them. "We couldn't have won without help." Tom Bradley approached, looking sheepish. "Jacob, Amelia, I want you to know, I've decided not to sell to Morrison after all. Figure my water rights are worth more to you than to him." "Tom, you don't have to do that," Amelia said. "Your wife needs medical care. We'll find another way. Some things are more important than money." As the sun set over Laramie, Jacob and Amelia climbed into their wagon for the ride home. $200 was enough to pay their debts, buy more cattle, and secure their future. But more importantly, they had proven that justice could prevail over prejudice, that love could overcome hatred. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked as they left town behind. "I'm thinking about tomorrow, about planting a bigger garden, buying more cattle, maybe even building an addition to the house." "An addition?" Jacob smiled and took her hand. "Well, we're going to need more room eventually." "For what?" "For our children. For the family we're going to build together." Amelia squeezed his hand, her heart full of love and hope for the future they would create together. The baby's cries pierced the quiet morning air as Amelia rocked little Sarah in her arms, trying to soothe the fussing infant. 3 years had passed since their court victory, and the Broken Arrow Ranch had flourished beyond their wildest dreams. But this morning brought unexpected visitors that would test everything they'd built. "Jacob," Amelia called from the porch, her voice tight with concern. "Riders coming fast." Jacob looked up from the new fence he was building around their expanded vegetable garden. In the distance, he could see 4 horses kicking up dust clouds as they approached. But these weren't the usual neighbors or customers. These riders wore the dark blue uniforms of the U.S. Army. "Stay inside," Jacob told Amelia as he walked toward the approaching soldiers. "Keep Sarah quiet." The lead soldier was a young lieutenant with serious eyes and dusty boots. He dismounted and saluted Jacob formally. "Mr. Whitmore? I'm Lieutenant Anderson from Fort Russell. We need to speak with you and your wife about an urgent matter." Jacob's heart started beating faster. "What kind of matter?" "There's been trouble with the Lakota tribes to the north. Chief Red Cloud's warriors have been raiding settlements, stealing cattle, burning homesteads." The lieutenant paused. "We've received reports that they're planning to move south toward this area. What does that have to do with us?" "We're evacuating all families within 50 miles of the reported raiding parties. Orders from Colonel Mitchell himself." Jacob felt cold despite the warm spring sunshine. "Evacuating to where?" "Fort Russell has temporary shelters set up. You'll be safe there until we can deal with the threat." "For how long?" "Could be weeks. Could be months. Depends on how long it takes to negotiate a new treaty." Amelia appeared in the doorway, baby Sarah in her arms. "What's going on?" The lieutenant tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I have to ask you and your family to pack essential items only. We need to leave within the hour." "Leave?" Amelia's voice rose in alarm. "We can't just abandon our ranch. I understand your concern, ma'am, but this is for your safety. These raids have been brutal. Families that stayed behind." He shook his head grimly. Jacob looked around at everything they'd built. Their house had been expanded twice, with a proper kitchen and 3 bedrooms. The barn was filled with healthy cattle. Their vegetable garden produced enough food to feed half the county, bringing in steady income. Leaving it all behind felt impossible. "What about our animals?" Jacob asked. "Our crops. Bring what livestock you can. The Army will provide compensation for any losses." "Compensation won't replace 3 years of hard work," Amelia said angrily. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but those are my orders." 1 hour. After the soldiers rode off to warn other families, Jacob and Amelia stood in their yard feeling overwhelmed. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built together, might be destroyed while they hid at the fort. "We could refuse to go," Amelia suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "With a baby? If there really are war parties in the area." Jacob shook his head. "We can't risk Sarah's life." They spent the next hour packing frantically. Clothes, important papers, baby supplies, some food and medicine. Jacob rounded up their best horses and as many cattle as two people could manage. The rest would have to fend for themselves. As they loaded their wagon, neighbors began passing by on the road. The Harpers with their 3 children, the Bradleys with a wagon full of furniture, other families Jacob recognized from town. Everyone looked scared and angry. "This is Morrison's doing," Ben Harper said as he stopped to talk. "Mark my words, he's behind this somehow." "How could Morrison cause Indian raids?" Jacob asked. "Maybe he didn't cause them, but he sure is happy about them. Saw him in town yesterday, grinning like he'd won the lottery." The ride to Fort Russell took most of the day. Baby Sarah cried from the constant jolting of the wagon wheels over rough ground. Amelia tried to keep her fed and comfortable while Jacob guided their small herd of cattle along the dusty trail. Fort Russell was chaos. Hundreds of families had arrived over the past 2 days, and the army was struggling to house and feed everyone. Tents were set up in long rows inside the fort walls. Children ran everywhere, crying for parents or playing war games with sticks. The smell of cooking fires and unwashed people filled the air. "This is temporary housing," a sergeant explained as he showed them to a small tent. "Meals are served 3 times a day in the main mess hall. Latrines are over there. Any questions?" Jacob looked at the tiny tent that would be their home for who knew how long. "When will we know if it's safe to go back?" "When the colonel says so, sir. Could be next week, could be next month." That night, as they lay on thin blankets with Sarah sleeping between them, Amelia voiced what they were both thinking. "Something doesn't feel right about this," she whispered. "What do you mean?" "These raids the lieutenant mentioned. Have you heard anything about them from the traders or travelers who come through?" Jacob thought about it. "No, I haven't. Usually news like that spreads fast. And why would Lakota warriors come this far south? Their traditional territory is hundreds of miles from here. Maybe they're being pushed south by other tribes. Maybe. Or maybe someone wants us to think they're coming south." Jacob felt a chill of understanding. "You think this is fake? A trick to get us off our land? I think Morrison has friends in the army. I think he found a way to force us out legally. But why? We beat him in court. The ranch is doing well. He can't touch us now. Can't he? If we're gone long enough, our cattle will wander off or die. Our crops will fail. Our house might burn down from an accidental fire." Amelia's voice was bitter. "When we come back, we'll have nothing left. We'll be forced to sell to pay our debts." Jacob stared at the canvas ceiling of their tent, feeling sick. If Amelia was right, they'd walked into a trap. Morrison had found a way to destroy them without breaking any laws. "What can we do about it?" "I don't know. But we need to find out the truth." The next morning brought surprising news. A young private named Thompson approached their tent with a message. "Mrs. Whitmore? Colonel Mitchell wants to see you in his office. Right away." Amelia left Sarah with Jacob and followed the soldier across the fort to the commander's quarters. Colonel Mitchell was an older man with gray whiskers and tired eyes. He stood when she entered, which surprised her. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." "What's this about, Colonel?" "I'll be direct. I've received some disturbing information about the reasons for this evacuation." He shuffled papers on his desk nervously. "It seems there may have been exaggerations in the reports about Indian activity." Amelia felt her heart speed up. "What kind of exaggerations?" "The truth is, there have been no confirmed raids in this area. No stolen cattle, no burned homesteads, no sightings of war parties." "Then why did you evacuate everyone?" Colonel Mitchell looked uncomfortable. "Because I received what appeared to be official reports from reliable sources. Reports that I now believe may have been fabricated. By who? That's what I'm trying to determine. But I have reason to believe that certain influential citizens may have pressured my subordinates to issue the evacuation order. Amelia leaned forward in her chair. Citizens like Samuel Morrison? I can't make accusations without proof, Mrs. Whitmore. But I wanted you to know that I'm investigating this matter personally. How long will that take? A few days, perhaps a week. In the meantime, I'm afraid everyone must remain here for their own safety, just in case the threat is real. And if you discover the reports were false, then I'll face a court-martial for wasting army resources. And certain civilians will face charges for filing false reports with the military. Walking back to her tent, Amelia felt a mixture of hope and anger. Morrison had overplayed his hand this time, involving the army in his schemes. But would they be able to prove it before their ranch was destroyed? What did the colonel want? Jacob asked when she returned. To tell us we might be the victims of the biggest lie ever told in Wyoming Territory. As Amelia explained what she'd learned, Jacob felt his anger building. Morrison had stolen weeks of their lives, threatened their livelihood, and put dozens of families through unnecessary hardship. This time he'd gone too far. We need to get word to our ranch, Jacob said. Make sure someone's watching our property. How? We're not allowed to leave the fort. Jacob looked around at the crowded conditions, the unhappy families, the soldiers trying to maintain order. An idea began forming in his mind. Leave that to me, he said quietly. I think I know someone who might help us. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Broken Arrow Ranch as Jacob and Amelia rode up to their house exactly 2 weeks after leaving for Fort Russell. What they found waiting for them would change their understanding of friendship, community, and the power of people standing together against injustice. I can't believe it, Amelia whispered, staring at their property in amazement. The house looked exactly as they'd left it, clean, well-maintained, with fresh flowers planted around the porch. The vegetable garden had been weeded and watered, with new growth showing in neat rows. Most surprising of all, their cattle were not only still there, but there were more of them than before. Ben Harper emerged from their barn, grinning widely and covered in hay dust. About time you got back, he called out. We were starting to worry you'd decided to become permanent soldiers. Ben, what are you doing here? How did you get back from the fort? Same way you did, I imagine. Snuck out after Colonel Mitchell announced the whole evacuation was based on false reports. Ben wiped his hands on his shirt. Had to come check on everyone's property. Everyone's property? Mary Harper appeared from behind the house, carrying baby Sarah, who was laughing and clapping her hands. We've been taking turns, Mary explained, handing Sarah to Amelia. Different families watching different ranches, making sure Morrison and his friends didn't try anything while folks were gone. Jacob looked around in wonder. You've been guarding our place? Not just us, Ben said. Tom Bradley, the Hendersons, even some folks from town you barely know. Turns out a lot of people were angry about this fake evacuation business. As if summoned by his words, more people began appearing. Tom Bradley rode up leading several cattle that bore Jacob's brand. The Henderson family arrived in a wagon loaded with supplies. Pastor Williams came on foot, carrying a basket of bread and preserves. Welcome home, Pastor Williams said, shaking Jacob's hand warmly. We've missed you. I don't understand, Amelia said, looking around at all the friendly faces. Why would you all risk Morrison's anger to help us? Because this wasn't just about you, Tom Bradley said seriously. This was about whether one man with money and influence could destroy anyone he didn't like. If Morrison could force you out with fake army reports, he could do it to any of us. Mary Harper nodded. We realized that standing up to bullies isn't something you can do alone. It takes a whole community. Besides, Ben added with a grin, we got tired of Morrison acting like he owned the whole territory. Man needed to learn some humility. Over the next hour, Jacob and Amelia heard the full story of what had happened while they were gone. The community had organized itself into groups, with different families responsible for different properties. They'd moved livestock to safer pastures, maintained gardens, and kept constant watch for any sign of Morrison's interference. Did he try anything? Jacob asked. Oh, he tried plenty, Tom Bradley said. Sent men to check on abandoned properties. But we made sure they knew someone was always watching. Hard to steal cattle or burn buildings when there are witnesses around. What about the Army investigation? That's the best part, Pastor Williams said with satisfaction. Turns out Morrison made a big mistake. He bribed a sergeant to file false reports, but he did it in writing. Colonel Mitchell found the letters and the payment records. Morrison's been arrested, Ben Harper announced, charged with filing false military reports and conspiracy to defraud. He's sitting in the territorial jail right now, waiting for trial. Jacob felt dizzy with relief and amazement. Morrison, who had seemed so powerful and untouchable, was finally facing consequences for his actions. What happens to his property? Amelia asked. Banks taking most of it to pay his debts, Tom said. Turns out he spent a lot of money on his schemes against you folks. More than he could afford. Some of his land's going up for auction next month, Mary Harper added, including that piece next to yours that he bought from Tom. Tom Bradley looked sheepish. About that, Jacob, I never actually sold to Morrison. Just let him think I did while we figured out what he was really planning. You mean? I mean the creek access is still yours if you want to buy my land fair and square. Family price, not Morrison price. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors arrived to welcome Jacob and Amelia home. People brought food, gifts for baby Sarah, and stories of how the community had come together during the crisis. This feels like a different place than when we left, Amelia said as they sat on their porch that evening, watching Sarah play with a wooden toy that Tom Bradley had carved for her. It is different, Jacob agreed. People learn something important, that they're stronger when they work together than when they let bullies divide them. Think Morrison's really finished this time? I think Morrison's finished himself. Hard to be a community leader when you're in jail for lying to the army. As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jacob and Amelia reflected on how much their lives had changed since that desperate day at the auction 3 years ago. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't bid on me that day? Amelia asked, nursing Sarah as fireflies began to dance in the growing darkness. Every day, Jacob replied. I think about how lonely I was, how hopeless everything seemed. And now I can't imagine life without you, without Sarah, without this community we've helped build. Amelia leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling grateful for the long journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and contentment. Sarah's going to grow up in a very different world than the one we knew, she said softly. Better world, I hope. Definitely better. She'll grow up knowing that love matters more than color, that people can change, and that communities are stronger when they include everyone. Think she'll appreciate how hard we fought for that? She'll understand when she's older. When she has children of her own, she'll tell them the story of how their grandparents met at an auction and built something beautiful together. Jacob smiled in the darkness. What will she say about us? That we proved love can overcome anything. That two people who started with nothing can build everything. That the American dream isn't about where you come from, but about what you're willing to work for. As they sat together on their porch, watching stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky, Jacob and Amelia knew they had found something precious. Not just love, but a place where they belonged, a community that accepted them, and a future bright with possibility. Their story had begun with desperation and ended with triumph. They had faced prejudice and overcome it, confronted power and defeated it, built love from the most unlikely circumstances. Most importantly, they had proven that when people stand together for what's right, no bully, no matter how wealthy or influential, can destroy what they have built with their own hands and hearts. The Broken Arrow Ranch stood as proof that America's promise belonged to everyone brave enough to claim it.